another episode of the Technicals podcast. This is a show interviewing different people in programming and technical fields to be able to learn from their life story and experience. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Thomas Stewart. He is a YouTuber slash self-employed game developer. So besides that, how about you tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Thomas. I was a programmer by trade for a few years, and then I taught myself game development, and then I got a job as a gameplay programmer at a studio based out of LA, and then I quit that job like 7 or 8 months ago, and I've been creating my own games and selling them to try and make a living. So there's like a whole bunch of stuff that's wrapped up into that. And I, within that time, I became a first-time dad, which has been awesome. And so I have my baby here next to me. So if you hear some crying, it's not me, it's the baby.
We can just get started a little bit then, going back a little bit. How did you kind of get into programming?
Oh yeah, the first time I ever programmed anything was in high school. I was required to do an internship. And so it was a really cool program at my high school. They forced us to leave campus once a week, and we had to go into the community, find a connection or a friend of a friend who did something that we were interested in. And so I found a guy that did programming from home, and he kind of taught me the very, very basics of programming stuff. He taught me how to program like an 8-ball, like random generator in C#. And that was the first time that I first touched programming. I knew that it was something that I might want to do because I was pretty tech savvy, but it really wasn't until my first introductory course in college that I did my first real programming task, I guess.
Cool. So you did, you mentioned, did you go to school for computer programming?
Yeah, I went to a small Christian university in LA, Bio University, and they had it was one of the few smaller Christian colleges that offered a computer science degree. And so it was cool because I got to study programming and the Bible at the same time. So it was like a very unique education experience.
What was kind of your experience like in college? What did you kind of think of the whole process?
Oh yeah, college was great. And because I have this talk with people a lot about like if college is worth it. And my opinion is that I had a great experience in college. I really valued most of my classes. I felt like most of them were worth my time, and I got a good education. But I think if all I wanted to do was get a job as a programmer, I probably would have been better off being self-taught, because I'm naturally like a very, very much a self-starter and a self-learner. So if that was the only thing that I wanted to get out of college was like a programming job, I probably wouldn't have gone the college route, but I really enjoyed my time in college. I'm from the Pacific Northwest too, and I went to college down in LA, so it was like nice and sunny, and it was kind of fun to move out of my hometown and kind of have that time to, I don't know, just get out of the house and progress into my next phase of life.
All right. So going like you're in school and you are kind of getting that experience that you really enjoyed. I mean, this is one interesting thing then. If you really think that if you wanted to only be a programmer, you probably could have and should have just not gone to school. What was it that you feel like you got out of school that was so valuable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is what I wanted out of a college education was, like I said, the opportunity to move away from home and have that experience of living by myself and away from family and kind of have that independence. But also a big part of it was the Bible education for me. That's something that I was very interested in learning more about. And so something that was cool about the school that I went to is no matter what you major in, everybody takes like 30 units of Bible classes. And so you take like classes on like the life of Jesus and the Old Testament and all of this different stuff. So that was a major thing for me. And then it also, that kind of religious studies and what influenced all of the prerequisite courses too. So like I would take like English classes and they would have like a theological spin on them, which was cool. So, but yeah, if all I wanted to do was learn how to program, I probably would have uh, not gone that route.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so outside of the classes in school, did you learn programming and have any other tools or resources or anything that you used?
Yeah, it was super interesting because the program that I was in, we used C++ and learned the basics of programming languages in general, but almost all of my assignments for almost all of my classes were using C++. And so it was up to me to, I felt like I did a ton of self learning even in college. So I would come home for like Christmas break and I'd be home for like 5 or 6 weeks. And I would use that time to like make an Android app or do some web development. So I learned the core, like real technical, low level programming stuff in my courses or like theoretical. Um, but it was my side projects that I was working on at the same time that taught me more of the tools that are kind of in a programmer's tool belt. Like
Hmm.
version control using Git and different programming languages and all of that stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you think that that's a good format for programmers to live by in their learning? Is to take some formal classes, get that general experience, but a lot of the practical how to actually build stuff is just from building projects?
Yeah, I'm like the way that I like to learn is very practical. I don't like theoretical learning at all. I would rather like if I'm gonna like say I want to learn to make an Android app. I don't want to go buy a book and read about the Android ecosystem. I want to like be hands on and get very much like what's this is how I approach everything, including like game development now. Is like what I call the bare minimum approach. What's the
Hmm.
least amount of like the simplest thing that I have to do to implement a basic connection or a display or whatever. Just make something as simple as possible and then grow it from there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So kind of going from there.
Yeah. I So when I was in school, I tried to optimize my learning as much as I could. So I did a lot of side projects on the side, and then I tried to, like, I came home uh, during Christmas break, spring break, and summers, and I had to work as much as I could in order to pay for tuition. So I always had to be working. And so I tried really hard to find jobs that would still build on my education. And I tried to find opportunities for learning and getting better at programming in general. So when I was at school, I had a part time job for a local web developer, and I helped him make websites for small businesses in the community, which was a really, really fun job. But when I was home, I would work for my dad. He worked at a place that did like finance something, and I did like data entry for him, and I didn't care for it. So I tried really hard to find summer internships while I was in college. And so I had two of those. One was up in Washington, and one was for the company that I ended up working for right out of college.
Hmm.
And so it worked out really well that I would go to career fairs at my college, and I would talk to people, and I got set up with a summer internship that they liked to recruit students who were about to graduate. And so I kind of was there for the summer and then was able to graduate into full time employment and just hit the ground running for that. So,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so that's really cool. What was, if you don't mind sharing, what was the kind of work that you were doing? What kind of languages and stuff were you working on?
yeah, it was a company that did like enterprise Java web development. So, um, like using like it was like a lot of learning Linux and server administration and AWS and like basically building like intranet and portal websites for complex websites like banks and insurance companies. Um, so I learned a lot at that job. And we used Java, which was pretty interesting too.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Okay, cool, cool. What was kind of the environment at that job? What did you kind of think of the work? Did you really enjoy it or what?
I really liked the people that I worked with there.
Hmm.
I made some friends, some really good friends, like three or four people that I still talk to on a weekly basis now. And this
Hmm.
was 7 years ago. So I made some really good relationships. I liked my managers. The people were great, and the work was varied enough that I didn't feel like I was pigeonholed into doing one thing over and over. Like I would
Hmm.
move from project to project and learn new things. Um, but what I realized was that we had to end up moving away out of the LA area because my wife was going to graduate school in another state. And so
Hmm.
they let me keep my job and work remotely. But then when I realized when all I had was the work and my uh, none of the relationships with my coworkers, that was when I realized that it was very unfulfilling when I was just
Hmm.
sitting at home alone doing all of this business stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. So where did you go from there? What was your action after that?
Um, yeah, so I it's kind of like a deep question because it I realized that up until this time in my life, everything is pretty much set up for you to just like show up and try and meet expectations, as far as school.
Hmm.
You show up to class and they tell you when you have a test. And so then you make sure you get an okay grade on the test, and you just keep going through that. And that's kind of how I lived up through college. But then I realized that I was working for this company. And if I didn't take any initiative, this is where I would be for the next 30 or 40 years.
Hmm.
And so, if I wanted to change, I had to first make a decision about the direction that I wanted to take my career, which was a very daunting prospect because you can really do anything. So it was very hard for me to settle on something that I wanted to pursue that seemed realistic to me in the moment. Um,
Hmm.
so, I mean, long story short, I wanted to learn game development. And so
Hmm.
that was something that I started pursuing in my spare time. Evenings and weekends, uh, I would watch some different tutorials and work on little projects here and there. And that was kind of how I fell into that.
Hmm. Hmm. So when did it become less of just a hobby and more of a like a desire to make it a career?
Yeah. Honestly, I think as soon as I started learning I never wanted it to just be a hobby. I always wanted it to
Hmm.
be a career option because I knew that I was a pretty good programmer and I knew that game studios need programmers. And so I thought I felt like I could accomplish getting myself into a situation where I could be working on games full time.
Hmm.
But it was just a matter of me trying to figure out how it works and how I could get into that position to be hired on as a gameplay programmer.
Hmm. Hmm. So what were some of the methods that you used to try and skew that a little bit in your favor?
Yeah, something that I realized is that I think this applies to programming in general, but I think it especially applies to game development is employers want a portfolio of
Hmm.
your past work because I think it's the most compelling thing that you can show someone to demonstrate your competency. Like for other white collar jobs, a degree is good enough to prove to somebody that you have the capacity to do a particular job. But for game development, I think that it maybe because it's such a visual industry, I don't know, but if you can physically show, yes, I made this, then your employer can depend on you to make something similar in the future. So that was kind of my focus is I wanted to make a nice looking portfolio that I could send to potential employers. And so I released one game on Android and two games on iOS, and I did a couple other side projects that I didn't finish, but I still put them on my portfolio because I learned valuable things in them. And that I think that was a big contributor to how I was able to get hired on.
So, I mean, this is just more on a practical level, but I'm curious about it. How was your experience between developing games for Android versus iOS?
Oh yeah, Android is way easier. I if anybody is torn between doing the two, Android is like it's night and day easier. And even from a cost perspective, it's like a one-time fee of $30, but if you want an app on the Apple App Store, you have to pay $100 every year, which is like a lot of money for me anyway at that time. And so, yeah, Android is definitely the way to go. I think that I have actually well, let me think. Yeah, I think I have had a pretty good progression for the places that I've published games on. I think Android was very easy, and then I moved on to iOS, which was kind of a nightmare, but it was um, good for me to learn that. Like I remember working late into the night one night trying to get uh, Xcode to sign my build so that I could put it on the App Store. And I just remember
Mm.
being so frustrated and working through all of these particular linker errors. And I remember thinking, like, man, this is not a fun hobby. Like, this would be great if I was getting paid for this, but I'm not. I'm just doing it in my free time, and this is not fun.
Mm.
Which is funny because then I, went on and I got paid to do solve linker errors. So it's like
Hmm.
I can't remember what I was saying with that. Oh, like the progression of different platforms. Like Android is really easy. iOS and working with Xcode is not great, but not impossible. Steam is pretty easy. Uploading to itch is probably where I would tell everybody to start using
Mm.
itch.io to upload games if you want to get into game development. And then now I'm doing console porting, which is like a whole new thing because you have to go into these platform portals for PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo, and you have to read all of their cryptic documentation that's all under NDA. So you can't Google anything because it's not public information. And then you have to
Mm.
set up your dev kits and build something on your computer, then transfer it over to the dev kit. And so it's like this whole thing. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, Android is way easier than iOS.
Would you recommend that then as a good place to start? Obviously, itch is like base zero. Like anybody can do that if they want to start releasing games. Would you say
Mm-hmm.
Android is a good step up, or would you recommend something else?
It's hard because I think it depends on what your goals are. Like, if you want to get into game development specifically, something that I found really valuable was being able to develop a very simple game and then put it into the hands of my friends and family.
Hmm.
But nobody in my friend group or family had an Android phone. So when I made my first
Mm.
Android game, nobody played it. I had like one or two people that I could reach out to play test it, But once I was able to put two games onto the App Store for iOS, it was fun because everybody in my family got to try it, and it was a much more fulfilling experience, I think. Um, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So that would you I think that this is a philosophy that people have used. I mean, kind of expanding that to general programming is to find a problem that people have and to try and solve it. And that's how
Yeah.
you can really make a good project. Is that part of
Hmm.
it? Then would you say for even deciding on your platform is seeing, okay, well, I want to make this for these people, but they use this, and to go out then on a limb
Yeah,
and try and learn that. Would you say you should seek the market almost more than like past your own skills?
definitely. Well, I think that now we're entering into a conversation about monetizing games that you make, which is a
Mm,
completely different beast that I'm still learning a lot about. Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack.
mm,
If you're learning game development just to learn the technical skills, then it doesn't really matter what platform you publish to because it's all valuable. And going through the process of from ideation to implementation to publication is very valuable regardless of where you do it. But if you're trying to make money, it's super super difficult, and I think you have to start from the very beginning of like, yeah, who's your target market, what is your core game idea? What's the hook for your game? What are some major competitive titles that you can relate it to? Um, and what platform best fits your gameplay? And so, like, people, if you look at the mobile market, it's like considered a solid win if you can keep someone engaged with your mobile game for 60 seconds. So that
mm,
means that if you're developing a mobile app that you want people to play and to grow and to make money off of, you need to make sure that your gameplay loop is super tight and snappy.
mm,
Meanwhile, if you're making a game for Steam, typically Steam players, the demographic there, they like the deep, complex, buildy, crafty games, maybe like a darker, sort of grittier genre of game. There's like a lot of players that play Steam games that are into that.
mm.
Whereas if you're developing for like Nintendo Switch, you'll get a lot more of like the cutesy, wholesome indie game sort of um, bright talking animal walking simulator sort of. So yeah, it varies a lot.
So going from that job, game development is kind of a hobby for you. Where did you go from there?
So from there, I put together this portfolio of some different projects that were pretty polished. You could get them on different platforms and download them and play them yourself. And so I felt confident that I could send them to employers and say, hey, check out some of the stuff that I've made. And from there, I just applied to a million different job openings. I used places like Indeed and LinkedIn and um, like all of these different, I can't even remember all of these different things. I signed up to get alerts for different game developer positions, and I didn't even care what I did. I just wanted to find a job that I could work inside Unity 8 hours a day, because I figured that that would be a major win for me, is if I could get paid no matter how much it was, but just get paid a little bit to open up Unity and work on game dev related skills for 8 hours a day every day, then I knew that my skill set would grow exponentially. And that is what happened eventually when I did get a job, but it took me a long time to get into the games industry. And most of the time what happened is that I would write a cover letter and I would fill out my job application, and I would tune my resume towards, like, I would tweak most every resume submission towards whatever job I was applying for.
Mm,
I would follow up with people. I would find emails that were published online, and I would cold email people, and it was like a hard job hunt, and I can't even remember, but it seems like I was applying for jobs constantly for over a year, or like maybe around a year, and just got rejection after rejection. Got a few interviews, but a lot of the times they would go forward with another candidate, or they decided that they're actually not going to fill the position in general, or
mm,
whatever. Um, so just hitting like wall after wall. And then the thing that eventually got me a job as a gameplay programmer was I started to think outside the box. because I was thinking about different jobs that I've had in my past and how I got them, and they were usually from networking and somebody who knows somebody, and being able to make that personal connection with uh, the employer. And so I
Hmm.
decided that's probably how people like to hire other people in general everywhere. And so I started looking at Twitter because Twitter is a place where game developers like to hang out. I like to refer to it as like the LinkedIn of the game dev world. I don't think I came up with that. I think I stole that from somebody, but it really is like a professional networking tool for game developers. And so I just searched on Twitter for a couple keywords that included like game development and Unity and hiring. And then I looked through people's tweets who were looking to fill open job applications for from within their social circle. And once I started searching through those, it wasn't long afterwards that I ended up getting a job. So
Hmm. Hmm. So, is that a way that you would really recommend to somebody who's looking for a job? I mean, I'm in the position right now. I'm looking for some sort of programming job or something like
mm-hmm.
that, of trying to
Mm-hmm.
do it on more of a personal networking level.
Yeah, definitely. It's because I like try to think about it from the employer's perspective, right? Like if you are going to pay somebody to build a program for you or a game, you want to be able to trust that person, especially if it's a remote job, because I was specifically applying to remote jobs because I didn't have the ability to move and be in person for whatever job I applied for. And so
Mhm.
there, yeah, so especially for remote jobs, the employer has to trust you tremendously because they don't know if you're just going to be on your couch playing Xbox all day or if you're actually going to be working, right? So,
Hmm.
uh, so if you have that connection where it's like, oh, let me talk to my friend who knows this guy, and like he's great, and I think he'd fit in well here. Uh, that automatically establishes trust that even if it's just a little bit, it's still significantly more than if you just get a random application coming in. So,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's really like an intuitive way to go about it. But really, I mean, like, and this is a question that I ask, and like people in the similar position I'm sure would ask, is how do you get that network? Like, if you don't know
yeah,
anybody who works for a programming place, how do you get to that place?
yeah, yeah. Because the strongest networking is in person, but like
Hmm.
I've been doing game development for I don't know like 5 years, and I don't know a single game developer in real life. All of my contacts are online or over social media. And so I think that's just kind of the game that you have to play. So I decided early on to invest in Twitter as a platform. And so
Hmm.
I will constantly post things on there, like work in progress stuff that I'm working on in my games, or like um, just stay connected with people and try and network on Twitter. And I'm up to like I don't know, like 3,500 followers or something, which is like a pretty good following on Twitter. And
Hmm.
I've met some really cool people. And from that, it's hard to measure these things, but people reach out to me on Twitter and YouTube now and talking about like wanting to work together, or like I've had publishers reach out to me like with interest of publishing my future games. And
Hmm.
so that's like a really big benefit of um, trying to be on social media too, is that when you show people what you're working on, it invites people to be a part of what you're trying to grow. And so it's actually really funny to me because I worked so hard to try and just get one person to say yes to hire me as a game developer, a few years ago. And since I've quit my job, I've had numerous people reach out to me in my DMs about wanting to work on their projects with them. And so I've had multiple opportunities where I'm like, oh man, do I really want to continue to bet on myself, or should I just go work with this other person, and get a paycheck
Hmm.
again? So that's been
Hmm.
an interesting thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's awesome, and that even gets back to showing like proving that you can build something by having a strong portfolio or even doing it full time of just building stuff. It's so valuable to where people will come to you and ask, "Hey, can you work for me?" And
Yeah,
that's
yeah, exactly.
I think that that's something that people really overlook a lot of times, is they just get so bogged down in that, just applying for jobs again and again and again, whenever almost a better idea would be to just start building stuff and showing people that you're building stuff, and
Hmm.
that can really apply it to it. Well, kind of going from there, you got the game development job, right?
Hmm. So I found this post on Twitter that was advertising an open position for a gameplay programmer, and I DM'd that person who posted that and said that I was interested. And so then they gave me a direct email to the director of technology that I could email my resume to. And so I emailed that person and said, "Hey, I got referred by this person on Twitter that said that I would be interested in applying for this job." And I had a couple phone calls, um, and ended up it ended up being a low risk for the employer because they hired me on a 3 month contract initially, which
Mm,
felt kind of scary to me at first because I was leaving a full time job in order to take a 3 month contract. But I think they did
mm,
that, just because they didn't really know me and they wanted to make sure that it would work out. So I did that for 3 months, and then they extended it and then put me on a full time salary. So that's kind of how I got that job.
mm. Awesome. So, what was the environment like working there as opposed to working at your old place? What were the differences?
Oh yeah, it's interesting because both places, when I transitioned, I was still working remote, and so it
Mm,
my interactions with coworkers were still all over Zoom. Um, I remember feeling very out of place when I first got hired on to the game dev job because I called into our daily stand up call, and I was the only person on the computer. Everybody else was in person in the office, and it was
mm,
it was a call with like 10 people or something, and I was the only one. And there were some days where they would forget to bring a laptop into the conference room, and so they were like, "Oh shoot, yeah, we forgot about Thomas." And
mm,
it was kind of weird being the odd man out in that way. Um, but I got hired on like a month before the world shut down from the global pandemic.
mm,
So it actually turned everybody on the team into remote workers. So after that first month, it was like all of us were on Zoom working from home. So
mm,
that was that was an interesting dynamic for sure. But one thing that really stood out between those two jobs for me is that my first job, everybody that I worked with was a programmer. Everybody,
mm,
like everybody, even the management, they started as programmers and then they got promoted enough to now they're managing people. Um, but for a game studio, it was very interesting because it's cross discipline. And so I got to work with
mm,
creative people that didn't even know what code looks like. So I would have meetings with artists and designers and music people, and we were all trying to contribute ideas and paths forward to manifest this vision for a product that we can all use our specific skill sets to build. So that's one of the things that I really like about the games industry is that it takes like a lot of different creative professionals.
mm, mm. Yeah, that's awesome. So, was it a lot more? I mean, I'm sure it was, but how was it fulfilling wise working at this job rather than the other one?
Oh, it was great. I loved it. I They threw me in the deep end. They threw me on a project where I was the only programmer, and I wasn't
Mm,
very good. I still didn't know very much about Unity. I'd made some projects, but I wasn't like good enough to be heading up a project by myself by any means.
mm,
But I did what I could, and I remember just like trying to learn on my off hours and trying to like catch up so that I'd be prepared to the next day at work. But I just absolutely loved it. Clocking into work every day and learning more and more I realize that that's something that's very fulfilling for me, is being able to learn while I work. And it's when I stop learning that I feel more stagnant and less fulfilled. So I really enjoyed it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So, if people don't really know about your story, this would kind of be a little bit of a surprise of what happens next. Then, after you said after what you said, so what kind of motivated you to take the next step in your life of becoming self-employed?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I was loving my job for a long time, and I was very fulfilled by the work that I was doing every day, and I was learning tenaciously. And but I had been there for a handful of years and realized that I was stagnating in what I was learning. And
Mm,
not only that, but I had additional things that I wanted to learn that were outside of my domain, specifically concerning art and design and business. And all of those things I wasn't allowed to pursue at my job because I was strictly a programmer.
mm,
And most programmers are fine with that. You know, they love being in the code and treating the code base as like an art form in itself. Um, but I had a lot more interests, and I wanted to be able to contribute at a design level towards the things that we were building. So that was one thing. Another thing is that I realized that I didn't. How do I put this? I feel like I could manage my time better than my employer could. So I didn't like having to clock in at 8 a.m. every day until 5 p.m. and uh, and if I worked really hard to get a task done early at my job, I was just rewarded with more work. So there was no incentive for
mm,
me to do things fast or efficiently. Um, so that was like a big thing for me, is I wanted to have the autonomy over my time, so that if I wanted to go for a run or take my dog for a walk at 3 p.m., I wanted to be able to have the liberty to do that.
mm,
Um, and then the last thing is that my wife was pregnant, and I
mm,
started to rethink my relationship with work as far as it goes, with work life balance. And I mean, that's really similar to the time autonomy thing. But I wanted to be able to have a relationship with work that I could work from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then have a long stretch spend time with my family, and then maybe work 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. if I wanted to, and just have the
mm,
flexibility to work on my own time, and also not be stuck in meetings that I felt like were kind of useless. So
mm,
those are kind of the major things.
mm, mm. So, how did you make the jump?
There's so much that goes into that. So there's like the financial aspect of like how do you quit your job to try and make your own video games and make money off of that. There's the relational aspect of like, I'm married and my wife was pregnant, and
Mm,
how do you try and convince your spouse that, um, let's take like a tremendous hit to our income and
mm,
try and live off of ramen noodles for the foreseeable future, um, while we're bringing a new life into the world. And then yeah. So I guess what it came down to is I know that in general, quitting my job to work for myself is a risky endeavor. And so what I aimed to do was minimize the risk as much as possible. And
mm,
so what that meant is, financially, I started keeping meticulous track of our finances. I started building out a million different spreadsheets that tracked where every penny went, and we started cutting some costs. We also started paying down some of our debts, student loans and car payments and things like that. Um,
mm,
and then relationally, I wanted to make sure that my wife specifically felt secure in the decision of me leaving my job. Um, I wanted to make sure that she felt she had a voice in the whole process, and that she I didn't want her to have to sacrifice too much for me to leave my
Mm,
job. And so like a big part of that was us like uh, putting away a financial runway into savings so that we wouldn't uh, we wouldn't have the we wouldn't be too scared about getting thrown out of our living situation and all of that.
mm,
Um, and then also like I did a lot of research. I had a lot of conversations like this one that we're having with people,
mm,
but I didn't record them. And I just reached out to people online that were doing what I wanted to be doing, specifically people who were creating games and YouTube videos simultaneously. And I got their insight into like their business strategy and regrets that they had, things that they've learned over the years. And I got some really valuable feedback from people. Um, so yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like the high level.
mm, mm. Yeah, no, that's cool stuff. It's such a interesting thing. There are so many things to consider. I think that people don't really think about. I mean, it's been
Hmm.
fascinating to hear you and like watch your videos and stuff like that of how many different details there are into it. But I am curious more on the like financial level, because you obviously have a lot of diversification of having, you have your YouTube channel and then you have your games that you're releasing and all of that sort of stuff. So what do you kind of focus on and spend the most amount of your time on, and what gives the most reward and results?
Yeah, it's hard because what's interesting about game development is that you are creating a software product that can be distributed basically infinitely, uh,
Mm,
with zero friction. And so what that means is once you release a game, if people see it, if there's like the marketing in place for people to see it, then you will be making some money passively, right? So
mm,
I released my first game on Steam, Tanks but No Tanks, and then I ported it to Xbox and PlayStation. And since I've released that game, I'm making money every day, and it's not a lot, but it is completely passive. I
mm,
haven't, I did a couple bug fix updates after I initially released it, but for the most part, I haven't touched it, and it's just, it's making some income, and yeah, it's not a ton, but it is completely passive at this point, which I think is a powerful income strategy. I have one company that hires me from time to time to do some of their server admin stuff. So I'll update their Linux servers and um, do some different stuff on AWS for them, and they pay me a lot of money per hour, relatively.
mm,
Um, and so it's interesting because the freelance path uh, seems more lucrative for sure, like per hour invested at this point.
mm.
But my strategy is to continue to uh, develop games and publish them because it's just going to stack, and it'll stack without me having to put in any time or effort into them. So
Mm.
I don't know. All that to say, like I have a lot of small revenue streams right now. I get some YouTube ad revenue. I've done like some sponsorships for my YouTube channel. I have people supporting me on Patreon. I have game sales from numerous different platforms. I have some freelance work. Um, Seems like there's one more thing. Oh, I also did. I also do. I used to do website development on the side, and so I have some clients that will pay me monthly for like web development and keep it and like hosting their websites and stuff. So like I have all these different smaller revenue streams. And and so what I'm focusing on is the game sales. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of things that I could be focusing on, and like I'm trying to do YouTube specifically so that I have a bigger reach to tell people when I launch a game. Um, but like the ad revenue from YouTube isn't very much, and so it doesn't really make sense from a monetary perspective. But
Hmm.
yeah, so my goal is to try and develop games that are small in scope and release a handful of them, so that in conjunction they just keep generating a little bit of revenue every day. So
Hmm. Hmm. Awesome. So, kind of wrapping up kind of this section of your story, would you recommend this as a path for people, the
oh,
self-employed?
no. there, I would not recommend it, and here's why. Because it is uh, one, it's really hard, and it's hard for a number of different reasons. Like you need a certain amount of mental fortitude to be able to live with this amount of risk and this
Hmm.
amount of decision making. Because there's no guidebook for what I'm doing. Like I've seen some other people do it, but there isn't really like a you follow this formula and then you'll be successful. It's like very much up in the air still if I'm going to be able to continue doing this. You know, it's very possible that I might have to go back and get another like a normal full time job in a while. But on top of that, there are so many skills that you need to do what I'm doing too. Like
Hmm.
you need to be a programmer, you need to be a designer, you need to be a businessman, you need to be a salesperson. You know, if you want to make videos, like YouTube is a whole completely different skill set in itself. You know, you need to be a marketer, you need to figure out what appeals to people and how to make thumbnails and have graphic design skills and be able to write compelling scripts or talk to a camera and edit
Hmm.
videos. And you need to figure out how to source sound effects for your games, and you need to be able to play test and be a producer and a project manager and figure out what are dates that you want to hit and just be super organized. So yeah, it's like a lot, but I love it. I feel like it's this career path is, I think it appeals to all of my interests and my particular skill set. So I
Hmm.
love the fact that I get to program a little bit and then I get to jump on a call to talk business with people and then I get to go edit a video, you know. So it's, I don't know. It's I guess I wouldn't recommend it to people because I think it's a very difficult place to uh, find a to be viable as a career path. So I'm
Hmm.
not I'm not positive that I'll be able to continue doing it, but I feel like I'm making good strides. And worst case scenario for me is that I come out of this with a very compelling portfolio that will allow me to get
Hmm.
a job back in the industry. So,
Yeah, yeah. Kind of on the flip side, what would you then recommend to somebody who maybe is sick of the 9 to 5, 8 to 5 job and wants to do this sort of thing, but is hearing and it's like, okay, maybe that isn't the best idea. Is there another way that I can have that flexibility and yet
totally.
survive?
Totally. This is something that I've thought a lot about, and I made a video about this. Then it kind of, the video just outlined the my thought process for making big career decisions in my life.
Hmm.
And what I realized was that there are so many different factors when it comes to satisfaction for your job. And it seems like most people that I talk to are dissatisfied with their job situation. Um, and I realize that there's a number of different factors that contribute to satisfaction in your career. And I made a chart for this so that I could try and quantify it. And a lot of these things are like enjoyment, how much your job is paying you, how difficult is your job, do you have the ability to learn at your job site, um, what else does it give you, do you have to work long hours, and do you get to choose when you work, do you have the ability to interact with people and have a positive social relationship with people in your workplace. And so all of these things contribute to your job satisfaction. And I used to think that a fulfilling job was one that you enjoyed. You know, that phrase, enjoy what you do and you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm.
Um, but I realized that's not really that's too simple, right? And
Mm.
like my first job that I refer to and say that I didn't really care for the work much at all, uh, but when I was there, I didn't have any complaints and I actually enjoyed it a lot. And a big portion of that was because I was learning a lot and I had good relationships with my coworkers.
Mm.
Um, and so game development in general is like super sexy, right? Like lots of people want to make games because it's an enjoyable career, and it really is. And I don't want to downplay that, but I do think that there are other options for people that are. It's easier to find a job um, that maybe you have more flexible hours with, and maybe it will be it'll allow you to learn a new skill, or it'll allow you to uh, make friends with your coworkers, or it'll pay more, you know, and maybe you'll get fulfillment
Mm.
from getting a higher paycheck and you won't feel like your time is wasted as much, you know, and maybe that's where your discontent is coming from. So I don't know. It's a really deep philosophical question, and I don't know if there's an objective answer to it.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a discussion to be had, and I know you've brought it up quite a bit of that your personality pretty much perfectly fits into the job that you're doing now, but not everyone is like that, and so some people like different aspects and stuff like that. So I'll link the video in the description of the show, so that people can go and check out the one on the different satisfaction factors and all of that, be able to judge for themselves. But kind of wrapping things up. Time is getting short here. So I always like to ask this question at the end of the show because I feel like it's a valuable one for all of the people out there and for consideration for us as well. But what advice would you give to somebody who's maybe listening right now to the show and is like, I'd love to get into this. I'd love to start programming. I'd love to start game development, any of this. But they have no idea where to start. They don't even know where to
Mm.
begin with it. What advice would you give to that person?
Man, there's so much to learning technical skills. Um, I would say, like, really zone in on what you want to learn specifically. Like, programming, like, as a general term, is like pretty broad. I would think of that like I think of programming as a highway. It's like programming is a
Mm.
road, and the things that you are, it just takes you to where you want to go, right? So I would figure out, what do you want to build? Like, do you want to build websites, or do you want to build apps, or do you want to build games, or do you want to build uh, like um, like flight controls for drones, you know? Like, I would find out what you want to build, and then learn programming as you pursue building whatever that is. And I would recommend just going on YouTube and typing that in, because there's a lot of good stuff on there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, awesome, man. I think that wraps everything up. So thank you so much for
Nice.
taking the time to be on today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. No, of course. So, kind of last thing, where can people find you and support you and your cause and everything like that?
Oh yeah, you can find me on YouTube if you just type in Thomas Stewart Dev, or you can find me on Twitter, Thomas Stewart W. And that's, oh, you can buy my game on Steam, PlayStation, or Xbox. It's called Tanks But No Tanks. It's a local multiplayer couch co-op arcade tanks battle game. It's pretty fun. I'm about to launch my next game, which is like a chill island city builder game. It's called Bridges and Docks. You can wish list that on Steam. That's kind of all my places.
Okay, awesome, man. Well, I think that about wraps things up. So goodbye to all the listeners.